Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us for our first LinkedIn Live event of 2025. Today, we're talking about menstruation, menopause, and workplace wellness. My name is Marisol Dicion. I am the Managing Director at Women of Influence Plus, and we're so excited to be joined today by Dr. Wagini Filate, who is a certified menopause expert and co-founder of Loom Women in Health. Dr. Filate, thank you for being here with us this morning.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, we've got a great discussion ahead of us. But before we delve right in, a quick note to our audience members, our valued audience members, please do share your comments and questions in the comments section. Our team is moderating this discussion, and we will be sure to get to as many of your questions as possible. Dr. Filate, you're all set?
Yes, let's do this.
Excellent. So my first question is, why do you think topics like periods, menopause, and fertility are still so taboo or just plain difficult to talk about in the workplace?
I think it's such a great question, and there isn't a simple answer. But I think if I were to group it into themes, I think the first one is there's a lot of shame, associated with a woman going through fertility challenges, going through menopause. We have such societal pressures on us as women to be youthful, to be fertile, to be in control. And when that doesn't happen, or if, for example, if you're dealing with fertility challenges, you feel that you are less than, there's something wrong with me. And you internalize that difficulty, that struggle, that there's something wrong with you. And the same goes with menopause. There's so much shame, there's so much stigma, and it's taboo, frankly. And part of that has to do with lots of reasons. One is lack of education among women. There are over 30 symptoms associated with the menopause transition, and many women, can think of just a few, off the top of their head, namely hot flashes and night sweats. So they may not even be aware that some of the symptoms they're experiencing are, in fact, the menopause transition. So you internalize that there's something wrong with me. I'm just not doing this well. There's something wrong that I'm not achieving. And then the other thing too is that there's such lack of education in the medical establishment, unfortunately. I did medical school over 20 years ago, and I can recall maybe one or two slides, frankly, on learning about menopause in a 4-year medical curriculum. And what that goes to show is that at the time, and unfortunately it still is today, we're training doctors to have not enough knowledge on this topic. And, when you go to your physician and you're looking for support and help, it's not that your doctors don't want to help you. They just may not be as educated as they want to be. So I think it has a lot to do with shame and stigma and also lack of education.
Now, Dr. Filate, we actually discussed those gaps, and I was personally so surprised to hear about that. And those gaps in education and support clearly spill over into the workplace. And if I may, I'd just like to share two statistics before we jump into my next question. Now, 40% of women work through severe pain, and 1 in 10 leave their jobs because they don't get the support that they need. From your perspective, how do these realities affect women's health and their professional lives?
Well, I think, especially if we think about that stat about women leaving the workforce in menopause, you said it's 1 in 10, that's 10%. And, women through the age 40 plus are like a large percentage of the working economy. In fact, they make up 25%. And, the fastest growing workforce for women is the age 45 to 55. So this is a really pivotal time in women's lives, in our lives, that we want to be productive. We want to be contributing members. But when we leave work or are not performing at our best, there are many health implications. First of all, if you leave the workforce, you lose a lot of the routine associated with your work. I think about myself, and I'm sure I'm not alone. Our work day is such an anchor, right? It's our beginning and our end of our day. And when you lose that, you lose your routine. You may not be as physically active. And there's something to be said about being in a workplace for a sense of camaraderie, a sense of collegiality, having a sense of place. And when a woman leaves the workforce, she loses that. And so you run the risk of social isolation that may increase challenges regarding mental health, anxiety, and depression. So from the individual woman's health perspective, having severe pain and leaving the workforce really has significant implications. Not only that, for the employer as well. If you're losing your top talent, that is a huge concern. There was a study done in 2022 out of the UK looking at women exiting the workforce at this critical period of time, and they called it, and I quote, a hemorrhage of talent. Right? So companies are losing really, really vital members of their workforce. And then, this is a broader socioeconomic problem as well. A study from the Menopause Foundation of Canada in 2023 actually looked at the cost that women leaving the workforce and unmanaged menopause symptoms cost the Canadian economy $3.5 billion annually to the Canadian economy. And that number was made up from, women leaving the workforce, women having decreased productivity in the workforce, also taking time off, right, to go and seek help for your menopause symptoms. Studies have shown that it can take women up to 6 medical visits before she is properly diagnosed with symptoms related to the menopause transition. So you think about your own experience, you taking time off to go to the doctor and this and that. And so you lose so much productivity. So it, not only is it a concern for the individual woman, for the employer and the company, but also for society at large. And that number is much larger in the US.
It sounds like there's a strong business case to pay greater attention to the challenges that women face from a wellness and health perspective. Mm-hmm. So given this opportunity, Dr. Filate, how can someone experiencing severe symptoms take the first step in addressing their needs with their employer?
Yeah, so I think the first thing, like anything in life, is you need to be prepared. So take the time to sit down and think about what are your exact symptoms that you feel are interfering with your productivity at work. List them out, and then think about ways that you would like to suggest changes or improvements that your employer can make to help you mitigate those symptoms. So number one, be prepared. Take the time to think about what your symptoms are and how you think your employer may help you accommodate those symptoms. The second is really take the time to meet the right individual in your organization. So who is it that you want to bring this to their attention? Is it your manager? Is it your team leader? Is it someone in HR? So you really want to make sure that you identify to the best of your ability who the right person is to address your concerns. And then the other thing is try to frame it positively, right? In a sense that, you don't want to make it sound that this is something that the employer now, it's another thing for them to do. You want to frame it and saying to them, listen, I'm experiencing symptoms related to the menopause transition. And I do think it's important that you actually label it as such, because it's an opportunity for education, right? And we talked about at the outset that education is really the key here. So take the time to label it and to say, these are the symptoms I'm experiencing, and I'm unable to perform at the level that I normally can. And I'd like to discuss with you strategies and ways that you can help support me in my work environment so that I can be a fully engaged member of the team and being productive. So those are the way I would actually structure that conversation.
That's great feedback and insight, Dr. Filate. Thank you for those. Now, once women feel prepared and supported in these conversations, how does a deeper understanding of their own health, especially during menopause, empower them to advocate for themselves with more confidence?
Yeah, I think going back to what I said at the beginning, knowledge is power, and we have to take responsibility for ourselves as women, right? We know the medical establishment is not where we'd like it to be. It's changing slowly, like with any big systems change. It will get there, but we're not there yet. So I really want women to think about how can they advocate for themselves, and how you start advocating for yourself is you need to be educated. Think about what are the symptoms associated with the menopause transition. And like I said, there are over 30. Believe it or not, it's not just hot flashes and night sweats. Granted, those are the predominant. And obviously, if you're having a hot flash, it's very unmistakable. But the symptoms that could also be included could be a brain fog, losing your train of thought. I've heard stories from women who are in the boardroom, standing in front of a group of their colleagues, And all of a sudden, it's like a blank slate. They lost their train of thought. They are completely embarrassed, and it takes them, a couple of minutes to recover. And then you might internalize that and say, well, there's something wrong with me. I'm just not coping. I can't perform like you're internalizing it as though, again, like a flaw in you, when it in fact is related to menopause. So symptoms of brain fog, sleep difficulties. A lot of women will all of a sudden have difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep. You have changes in your weight. There's changes in the vagina. You may have to go to the washroom more frequently. So there are tons and tons and tons of symptoms that I would say, in order to really advocate yourself, we need to educate ourselves too. So that's sorry, go ahead.
No, please continue.
And then the other thing, so once you've, advocating for yourself is so important, then you can actually engage your healthcare provider in a really informed decision-making capacity, right? You are now going to be a fully fledged member of this medical decision-making that's going to happen between your healthcare provider and yourself. You will have the knowledge, the ability to evaluate what your physician or your alternative, any other healthcare provider is providing you with ideas and strategies. You can come to that discussion more informed and make better decisions. And the other thing too is I want women to see this time of transition as a real opportunity for growth, right? This is a time when, yes, you can talk about the doom and gloom of all these symptoms. Your periods are changing. They may become heavier. You might have more painful periods. But it's also a time to focus on what is the next half of your life going to look like? What strategies, what lifestyle changes can you implement during this time to really set you up for living this next half of your life in a really healthy and proactive way? I mean, the average Canadian woman can spend up to a third of her life post-menopause. That's a lot of living to be done, right? It's a lot of working and a lot of time to contribute to society and to your family. And so how does this next chapter look to you? And so it's a great opportunity to take it as a way to engage in preventive health strategies.
Thank you so much for that. A lot of great nuggets of information there. And I have 2 follow-up questions. I was so excited to get it out. I've been waiting with bated breath. Okay, my first follow-up question is, you mentioned that women typically internalize this. It's something that's wrong with them when they start to experience these symptoms. How soon, or if you could recommend a number of symptoms or the kinds of symptoms should we pay attention to that will prompt us to begin having these important conversations, not just with our healthcare professional, but with our workplace as well?
Yeah, so I think, take inner stock. As a physician, I always say, no one knows the patient better than them, right? So I can try to ask questions and engage with you and try to get a sense of what your symptoms are, but I'm not in your body. So you have to be able to identify changes. I would say anything that you say is a change from your, what we call baseline, or what your typical sense of being is. So could that be changes in your menstrual cycles, right? So women will often start to have irregular menstrual cycles. They can become much heavier. They can be painful. Again, cognitive changes. So we talked about the mental fog, forgetfulness, difficulty with attention and concentration, sleep changes, and things like that. So really just to be mindful and to bring it up with your healthcare provider. And then if you feel that that's actually impacting you at work, to then say to your employer, listen, I spoken with my healthcare provider, or I feel that I'm experiencing symptoms related to the menopause transition, and I'm not performing at my best for X, Y, and Z reason. Can we sit down together and create a strategy of how I can, take the time that I need to treat my symptoms and yet still be a productive and contributing member to my organization?
Wonderful. Now, building on that, back to the organizations, from what you've seen working with both women as individuals and organizations, what kinds of adjustments in the workplace make the biggest difference for women?
So I think there are a number of things that can be done in the work environment itself. So for example, Now we're all familiar with working from home and working virtually. So maybe advocating for having a larger percentage of your workday to be performed virtually or remotely so that you can take breaks as needed and you can manage your symptoms in your own home or somewhere where you feel comfortable. So having the flexibility in your work environment. If you have to be present at work or when you're physically at work, looking at accommodations in the physical space. So can there be places where you have greater control on temperature, on thermostat? Is there a private room available to you where you can, go maybe work quietly so you have less distractions and you can stay focused? So again, looking at the physical environment. And then the other things that employers can do or workplaces can do is to provide you with medical support. So what does that look like? Could that be in terms of medical benefits that not only cover, a lot of companies have now come on board to provide fertility treatment care, covering for treatments, but also providing women medical benefits for menopause support, medications to cover around the menopause, treatments. Not only are treatments, medication based, but there are a number of lifestyle and non-medication based treatments. So whether that be cognitive behavioral therapy for brain fog, cognitive behavioral therapy for sleep and insomnia. So really looking at the holistic package of medical benefits. And then finally, the other thing that employers can do is education. Again, it's like my favorite word. I keep coming back to it. But we can't fix what we don't know, right? And unless we are taking the time to go out and ensuring that our employer and the company is educated on menopause. And this is not just for women. I mean, men should learn about this too. They are, in positions of leadership as well. They may have women in their team. They are our allies, our partners. So they need to be aware of what's involved in the menopause transition as well, and education for the employee. So that's how I find 3 buckets really of how women can get support in the workplace. So through accommodations with their work schedule, work balance, project deadlines, the medical piece, and then finally the education piece.
Now, education seems to be the commonality here, the overarching narrative that can help address the challenges that women currently face in the workplace when going through these health conditions.
Mm-hmm.
In your opinion, how can education, our favorite word of the morning, for both employees and leaders help break down stigma and normalize or even begin to normalize these conversations?
I think by the simple act of using words like menopause and bringing those words into the boardroom, into companies, can help break down the stigma. It can help with creating empathy, right, for colleagues that are going through the transition, can help with addressing misconceptions and common myths. Oh, it's just, you suffer through it, you'll get through it. It's a natural part of aging. Yes, it is a natural part of aging, but suffering doesn't necessarily have to be a part of that equation. So really breaking down the stigma, creating empathy, as well as getting rid of those misconceptions, I think are one of the biggest things that education can address. And, naming a problem can often help starting to address the problem too.
Back to education. And let's say you find yourself in a workplace where your leaders aren't educated on these health conditions. What advice would you offer to someone who feels unsupported or who isn't sure of how to balance their health needs and their career in this unsupportive environment?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think the first thing I would say is sort of take stock with how you're doing. So what are your symptoms that you feel are interfering at work? And to think about, what are your non-negotiables in your work environment? So for example, is flexibility important to you in your work? Is being able to, okay, I'm feeling burnt out. I feel confused. I need to go outside and go for a walk for 10 minutes and come back to my desk. Is your work environment supportive of something like that? If you feel unsupported, seek support. So find those, leaders in HR or employee benefits or whomever you know in your organization who would be a great place to even start the conversation with, this is what I'm feeling and how is it that you guys can help support me? And then finally, it's okay if it's not a fit, right? Know what it is you want for yourself and what where you can be your best self as an employee, as a woman, as a society member. And if it's not where your current job is, seek supports. If they can accommodate you, then maybe it's not a fit, right? And I know that sounds easier said than done, go find a new job. But I think it's important that, we try to find employers that are supportive. And life is too short to be somewhere where you're not seen for who you are and the value that you bring to an organization.
Dr. Filate, could we go back to some of the individual changes that women can make when entering these phases of life and talk about the lifestyle changes, but specifically the lifestyle changes that surround our work routines?
Mm-hmm.
What sorts of changes do you recommend to your clients when they find themselves in these phases?
Yeah, so what kind the most important lifestyle changes, and they're actually the most simple, and your mother, your grandmother probably told these to you. So it's really ensuring that your diet is as optimized as you can be. I know it's very easy when I've done it a million times where I might skip lunch, or I might find, if I have only 10 minutes for a break to eat, I'll, pick something that's quick and fast, but may not be the most nutritious. So looking to really almost front run that. I know that my day today is going to be very busy. So I think it's important that either I pack a lunch or plan in advance what is the food that I'm going to use to sustain me during the day that is, full of protein. Women need a ton more protein than we think we do to help fuel our muscles as we age. So again, focus on your diet. And again, preparation is key. So if you have a busy day planned, to really think about where you're going to get the best nutrition in your day. Exercise is a big thing. So sure, it's easy to say, yeah, take an hour off and run to the gym. It doesn't have to be that complicated. It can even be, if you have a meeting with a colleague, say, you know what, let's take this meeting outside. Let's go. That's our half an hour meeting. We were all going to be camera off anyways. Let's go for a walk, right? Let's do this meeting while we're walking. And again, you're now bringing in a partner. You have an ally to become healthy, and then they might then trigger someone else to do the same. So thinking about ways that you can accommodate where you are at your work and try to incorporate those areas of physical activity. Is it walking to work, taking the stairs instead of taking the elevator, going for walking meetings? And the other piece to lifestyle is stress management, right? It's so hard, but we need to be always thinking about it, because when you're not optimized with your stress management, you're not as productive. You can't be operating at your best. So think about ways to mitigate the stress. So is it, putting a 10-minute, I'm going to go walk around the office, go meet some other people in the office to sort of, help with my mood, do that. But to really think about what works for you in terms of stress management.
Those are great tips. Thank you. We're going to get to a couple of audience questions, and reminder to our valuable audience members, please do drop your questions in the comments section and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. So the first question is, how might one know the difference between brain fog due to menopause versus dementia?
It's a great question. So the brain fog that is related to dementia, let's try that again. The brain fog that is related to menopause is really an issue of inattention. So it's not so much that you are forgetting, it is that it is difficult to drown out the noise that is around and to stay focused on a task. And I like to tell women, think about your brain when you're having brain fog as a computer that has 15 tabs open. And so you're trying to work on one thing, but you have 15 tabs open with notifications going at all times. So of course, it's going to be difficult for you to focus on one thing. So think about your brain with all of those tabs. And so cognitive behavioral therapy can actually help you to kind of quiet that noise and to stay on task. So when we think about brain fog for dementia, for menopause, it really is an inattention piece. Whereas dementia, classically, it happens later in life, not usually around the time of perimenopause or menopause. And it has to do with, forgetting things that are more recent. So, and it has to be over a prolonged period of time. So they're very often different presentations. So think about the menopause piece, the cognitive changes related to inattention.
Thank you for that. Our next question from the audience is, what if your workplace does not have an agenda or a framework or a way of going about addressing these health conditions that women face? What should you do?
Yeah, so that can be often very challenging. Again, you feel like you're like a lone ship in the night. The first thing I would do is perhaps try to find an ally or someone in the HR department that can, help you to bring this forward. And it may be as simple as starting like your own little group. There are many positive stories of women, like women of one, who are creating in their own companies little support groups, right? So find other women in your organization who are similarly experiencing this. Create support groups, just with, lunch groups, for example, or maybe you create support groups and then really try to get buy-in from the employee's point of view, and then maybe bringing that to your it's not me. I'm not the only one going through this. Look, there's like 10 or 15 of us. And I think going back to your piece about showing the economic impact, right, of the menopause transition is also something that will start to, I think, get organizations really thinking about retaining women at this stage of life is such an important piece and actually good for business.
Now, building on that, if there's one thing you would tell women about advocating for their health at work, what would it be?
I think the number one thing is not to be afraid to speak up. Like back to that previous question, sometimes it can be really isolating and lonely to know that you feel like you're the only one. And the other piece I would say is advocating for yourself and speaking up is not selfish, right? All change starts with one voice, right? So speaking up, and you would be surprised that, when you speak up, there are probably 10 or 15, 20, 30 women behind you who are saying, yeah, I've experienced the same thing too. And really driving change always starts with one voice.
Dr. Dr. Filate, sorry. We're almost at time today. Before we go, I just would like to direct our audience members to the comments section where we have a wonderful downloadable sheet that Dr. Filate and her team have prepared for us that has more information, some tips to help you navigate this stage or this part of your journey in the workplace and in your health. And before we go, Dr. Filate, is there anything that you'd like to share with our audience about
Yeah.
health or navigating this at work?
Yeah, so I would like to provide a little personal plug. So as you saw from the bio, that I am actually one of the co-founders of Loom Women in Health. This is a brand new private medical clinic in downtown Toronto, specifically designed for women, for women, period. Our areas of expertise are perimenopause and menopause, disease prevention, pelvic health, sexual wellness for women. We also work actively with institutions and corporations to provide that education that I was talking about earlier. We have talks that we've delivered to large organizations with huge success rates. So we would be more than happy to come into your workplace and to start that conversation, to help you be that voice of one to make that change. And you can find all of that info in the download attachment.
Wonderful. Dr. Filate, thank you for all the work you and your team are doing to break the stigma and to educate. Your time with us was so appreciated this morning. And I hope that our audience took a lot out of that discussion, some great tips. I know I did. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you in February for our next LinkedIn Live event. Stay tuned for more details, and we'll see you then.